Good morning, everyone. My name is Alisa Bokulich, and I am the director of the Center for Philosophy and History of Science here at Boston University. It is my pleasure to welcome you all to the 56th annual program of the Boston Colloquium for Philosophy of Science. We organize several events throughout the year, and our next upcoming event will actually be in April, which is on the subject of race and epistemic marginalization in science. So we invite you to either sign up for our mailing list or visit us online at bu.edu/CPHS to learn more about our upcoming events. So our topic for today is how can HPS contribute to science literacy and citizenship? Before we begin, however, I would like to express my deep gratitude to my co-organizer, Peter Garrick, who is a professor in the science education program here in the School of Education. We'd also gratefully like to acknowledge the support of the School of Education and also a generous grant from the National Science Foundation, which has made this conference and its predecessor back in 2012 possible. So the motivation for this conference arises from our perception that we need to do a better job preparing our students as citizens who can make decisions about complex issues that require a balance of what science informs them about the natural world with local and global, economic, political, ethical values and responsibilities. Too often, science literacy is construed narrowly in terms of the content of science, when what may be equally important is to understand how to tell the difference between science and bunk, how to appreciate the appropriate standards of evidence in a given context, and also to know how and why we should trust science in our deliberations. So some of the questions that we want to explore during the conference include the following. This is just a preliminary list. I'm sure you'll all come up with many more as the day progresses. But first, what do we need to teach citizens about science in order to have more successful science policy? Second, how can the history and philosophy of science be used to help scientists and educators communicate to the public what they need to know to be responsible citizens and voters on scientific issues? 3, how do we teach students that science policy is formulated at the intersection of multiple competing domains, including not only science, but economics, law, ethics, culture, and politics? How do we teach what doubt means in science and contrast this with what we take to be durable scientific knowledge? What might a grade appropriate spiral curriculum look like that matches students' science content learning with social studies for informed citizenship? And finally, what professional development is needed to prepare teachers of different subjects to discuss science and its connections with public policy? So we'll continue to think of more questions as our talks unfold throughout the day and tomorrow, and we'll invite certainly even more participation from the audience in a roundtable discussion, which will be tomorrow morning. So without further ado, it is an honor and pleasure to introduce Dr. Hardin Coleman, who is Dean of the School of Education here at Boston University, who will make a few brief opening remarks. So please join me in welcoming Dean Coleman.
Thank you for having me here. When Peter invited me to give a few remarks, I went deep into my anxiety as a failed science learner. I have an embarrassing SAT score. I was at a time in the process when you could get to 10th grade and take terminal math so you could do your SATs, which I did. And still go on to competitive careers. So it wasn't until I was finishing my stat rotation and graduate school and was taking a course on test construction from Ed Hardin, and he put the matrix up on the board, that I finally understood that I had never had matrix algebra, and therefore I'd gone through stats trying to read the text, not the formulas. And my wife, who's a math teacher, I had to do something to help my children survive the world. So I married well, and who would start reading these formulas. I'm going, what are you reading that for? Because I couldn't understand it. Now I did do a factor analysis on dichotomous variables for my dissertation, and at one point I could explain that to people, even the formulas. But the reason I want to bring that story up is that as we work particularly in urban areas, in challenged situations, the issues of numeracy and science literacy are fundamental to what we have to think about. And as you well know, too many of those of us who lead these institutions were, like me, not in love with science or well prepared in science. So one of the things that I really appreciate the focus of this conversation is the need for us to consider more deeply and broadly the importance of science literacy in creating the next generation of citizens. And as many of you probably don't know, I'm vice chair of the Boston School Committee, and this is an ongoing conversation in how we try to structure what it means to be a high-performing school. And as many of you also know, the education research is so explicit about the importance of early literacy on the development of effective students that we forget the role of numeracy and science literacy, and people keep wanting to write it out because they have the data that says you need to be literate before you can perform in other areas, mostly driven by the fact that many of our elementary school teachers, who I think are the beginning of the issues, were, like me, not in love with the science and numeracy that they had early, and this is an opportunity to be different and be with children in a different way. So one of the things that we're trying to do in Boston, and I think one of the things that the School of Education is we're very proud of, is our engagement early on with elementary educators around the absolute value of acquiring numeracy and science literacy, and what that means to have an engaging curriculum, and how we fold that up through the high school years so that people truly engage. But what I particularly appreciate the time that Peter and others have spent in putting this conference together is that balance between being a thoughtful, evidence-based thinker and citizenship, and the absolute deep need we have for people to consider what the evidence is before they make decisions. And we don't have to have any public commentary at this time about the presidential campaign, particularly on either side of the House, for our ability to have our significant leaders drive a non-evidence-based approach to gaining power in the world. And so I really appreciate the time you spend in thinking about what we need to do, particularly within K-12 structures, to improve the scientific literacy of our citizens so that they can use a more evidence-based approach in the world. So I thank you very much for your time and the energy, and I look forward to hearing the outcomes of the conference. Thank you.